The IMF World Bank annual meeting, the four meetings, will take place next week in Marrakesh, Morocco. The first time that the event is taking place on the continent of Africa in 50 years. Also this week, the managing director of the IMF, Ms. Kristalina Georgieva, will deliver a cutting speech in Cote d'Ivoire. The first time that the event is taking place in sub-Saharan Africa, on the African continent also, for the first time. So this event as a whole is very, very significant, not just for the African continent, but also for Morocco and the hosting country. As we know, the country Morocco recently experienced an earthquake, and a devastating earthquake that took the life of some of the citizens. So this event is part of the international community support for the recovering effort that is ongoing right now in Morocco. Ahead of the meeting, ahead of next week, I sat down with the director of the African department, Mr. Abebe Selassie, for a variety of interviews that touch on issues that concern the African continent, including issues as climate change, tax issue, as well as addressing the large youth unemployment, and also some other micro economic issue, and how the IMF is working with policymakers on the continent to address some of these challenges and help the continent and its people move towards the future. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, is a global financial institution created in December 1945 to help with the reconstruction of the international monetary system after World War II. It now plays a key role in the management of balance of payment difficulties and international financial crises by working with governments on economic policy that promote financial stability, sustainable growth, and prosperity. It does this by providing technical assistance, surveillance, and loan to governments. Though it works with all governments, majority of its clients tend to come from the so-called global south, the emerging and developing countries, including from across Africa, where the global impacts of the COVID pandemic and climate crisis have erased the economic progress made by majority of the countries on the continent in the past 2 decades. Welcome. I'm Kemi Oshikoya. Thank you. I'm at the IMF headquarters in Washington, D.C. today, and I'm here with the director of the African department, Mr. Abebe Selassie. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been trying to do this interview for quite a while, so thank you for agreeing to sit down with us and talk with us this morning. I wanted to start off by talking, I know we are just weeks away from the annual meeting that will be taking place in Marrakesh, Morocco, next week. Is there anything that you can tell us about the African region, what to expect?
Very good question. I mean, I think the big news really is that this is the first time that the meetings are going to be held on the African continent in 50 years. The last time they were held on the continent was in Nairobi in 1973. And really very happy that it's again going to be taking place in the continent. You could say long overdue, definitely. So we're very excited about that. Relatedly, I think, Kristalina, again for the first time, the managing director is going to be giving the curtain raiser speech, speech where she puts on the table the kind of issues that she hopes we make progress on. That curtain raiser speech will also be in the region for the first time ever in Abidjan this Thursday. So very excited that we are going to be using these meetings to draw attention to the region, the challenges that it's facing, but also the tremendous opportunities that we expect. That is there in Africa. So I think that's one big news I can share.
Okay. Speaking of issues, as you mentioned, this will be the first time in 50 years. The continent as a whole has undergone different cycle. And in 2000, it was the African Rising. And now it seems that the continent, the nations are sort of like an inflection point. Could you talk about some of those issues? What is different now compared to the 2000 and 2010? What are some of the challenges that the continent is facing now?
That's a very good question. I think, first, I think we are always focusing on the challenges and how we as countries, we as people need to do better. And we compare ourselves with richer countries, of course, as we have to, because we want to be as good as them, if not better. So in that light, it's always easy to see the many challenges. But the first point I want to make is that we shouldn't underestimate also the progress that has been made by our countries, by our people. It was only in the late, mid-60s, late 60s that the critical mass of countries were gaining independence from colonial powers. Then countries were beset by, all of the things that befall new nations, forming a state, strengthening institutional capacity. So, the 70s, 80s were a difficult economic time, but through all of this, over the last 40, 50 years, there's been tremendous progress in development indicators, particularly. So Africa now is much changed place relative to where we were, 30, 40 years ago. And I'm not talking about, shiny new buildings, better skyline. I'm talking about, the things that really will lay the ground for fundamental progress. Things like life expectancy increasing very significantly, maternal mortality, infant mortality, really important indicators, that point to the well-being of society, all having improved tremendously and closing the gap much more than anybody would have expected 30, 40 years ago. So there has been tremendous development progress. We absolutely still have way too much poverty, way too much challenge, and we need to do better on that. But the first point I want to make is that there has been huge development progress. Second, the region's economic well-being partly depends on external conditions, but also, of course, domestically, how we address the challenges that we face. So a big difference relative to the pre-pandemic years, when, in the period between, 2000 and 2015, 16, we saw a lot of excellent growth being reported by many countries. Big difference now is, of course, the impact that the pandemic and then other shocks that followed the pandemic have had on countries, on our people, on people's well-being. The pandemic itself was a huge toll on the region. That was swiftly followed by the effects of the supply chain disruptions that took place as a result of the pandemic, pushing inflation up. And then you had Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which pushed prices even higher, food prices, fuel prices, which all have had very severe effects on our countries, on people. So that has, I think, been by far the most significant economic toll that has been exacted on the region, and coupled with the internal challenges in many countries, not enough was being done, for example, to collect enough taxes to pay for the goods and services that governments are providing. In other cases, you had other challenges, governance, conflict, coupled the domestic challenges coupled with this really difficult external environment is what has been behind the economic challenges that our countries have been facing. And again, the key here is to find a way forward, and of course that's what we work on with countries.
While the goal is to help countries find a way forward by better managing their balance of payments so they can get out of their financial distress, the fund, as the IMF is colloquially known, has been criticized by some of the ministers and financial experts for being out of touch with the local economic realities and customs of many of the developing countries it's supposed to help get back on their feet, with its tightening the belt financial prescriptions for these countries, even though most of them can afford to buy a belt. We were just at the UN General Assembly. I had the opportunity to talk to some of the ministers that will be attending the annual meeting next week. And they are concerned, from the environmental minister to the finance minister, they are concerned they don't have enough resources to address these challenges. And they are also calling for reforms of the multilateral financial institution, the World Bank, the IMF, and the African Development Bank. Could you talk about how you are addressing this issue and some of the criticism that are being made that the interest rates that a lot of the African nations are receiving in comparison to advanced countries are way too high? Could you address some of those issues?
Sure. So I think we have been incredibly aggressive, highlighting the funding squeeze that countries are facing, particularly in the wake of the pandemic. Okay? I think we were one of the first institutions, if not the first, that as soon as the pandemic hit, came out noting that countries are going to need tremendous external support to be able to go through the pandemic. We made the case for, by calculating and showing what kind of financing gap countries are facing, and that work is actually what animated and gave rise to the discussions that took place in Paris in May 2021. For example, made the case for SDR allocation. So as an institution, we've played our role both in making the economic case for supporting the countries, but also making our balance sheet available to support countries. Okay, so when the pandemic hit and in the subsequent years, we've lent well over $60 billion to Africa. We provide financing to the tune of $60 billion to the region. This is multiples, 10 times or more of the amount of financing we will be providing in a given
in regular season. Yeah.
So we've not just been talking about it, we've not just been making the case to the international community to do more to support the region, but also making this financing available. Second, this financing that we provide to countries also is either zero interest rate, that's what our Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust, for example, does, or very low interest rates, even in the case of other facilities and the SDR allocation. Certainly not the market rates, the high rates that countries face outside. And of course, countries, should continue to expect more from us. There are high expectations for us to continue to do more. Rightly so. We belong to African countries as much as anybody else, and need to continue to do more. But we face one challenge in terms of our ability to do that. That's internal to us, which is that we need more resources to be able to subsidize the low, particularly for this Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust. So we've been in a very active fundraising campaign to try and have as much subsidy resources as we can to be able to continue lending at zero interest rates, and we hope to make progress on that front in the upcoming meetings. But second, and this is also really important, the challenges that our countries have, it's not just the financing challenge, but it's also internal reform that have to be undertaken. The key also is that this financing has to be coming in to support important reforms. Otherwise, financing by itself will not solve anything. Rather, it will result in higher debt and no underlying change in economic conditions. And then lastly, the point that you raised about the interest rate costs that our countries face relative to advanced countries and others is a valid one. I mean, it is of course a fact. It reminds me a little bit of how poorer people here in America face higher borrowing costs than the millionaires, right? So I think what that tells me is that at the country level, this is exactly why IMF, World Bank, others step forward to provide concessional financing for the most vulnerable members, right? That's our raison d'etre, particularly for the IMF at a time like this when you have huge dislocation in financing markets. But also, I think the broader message for our countries is exactly this point I was making on the need for robust reforms so that we can reduce reliance on external financing. And by far the most robust way we can do this, of course, is through domestic revenue mobilization, investing in all the right areas, in health, in education, and infrastructure, but also collecting the returns on this investment through the tax system. And I think that is, the existential challenge that our countries face and what we need to work on.
In many African countries, low tax rates and revenue, large tax exemption, large informal markets, complex tax system, corruption, lax compliance and accountability in the tax system contribute to huge loss in countries' GDP. Of the 49 countries worldwide that collect less than 13% of their GDP, 20 are in sub-Saharan Africa. You've been talking about collecting taxes for a while now. Why do you think African finance minister, African nation government, for example, are not doing that?
I think, there are many factors. I mean, there's no single or simplistic answer that one can give. And the reasons vary from country to country, from time to time. At a time like this, a legitimate case can be made that economic conditions that people are facing, high inflation, toll that the pandemic has exacted in economies, on jobs, etc., makes it a difficult time to collect taxes. So that's, over time also the factors change. But honestly, I think if we are to look at ourselves as Africans, if we look at ourselves as countries, I think a really important reason has been that countries have, politicians, governments have shied away from going out and being unpopular. Okay, so actually saying that, look, if you want us to spend more, it has to be through tax rather than debt, right? Because if you don't pay for the health services, the education services, the road that you want built through taxes, the alternative is debt, right? So, governments sometimes have chosen the easier path, the debt path. But I think we as Africans also really don't do enough to acknowledge that, right? I mean, I'm talking about, the general public. We don't pay enough taxes, but still want to have roads, and that cannot happen, of course. So, I think it's a matter for not just government, but society at large to have this discussion and strike the right balance in terms of, what level of spending, what level of taxation should be had.
So what you're saying is governments, basically the technical aspect of the tax, they need to make that campaign to the public that, hey, if you want these things, you need to, like the US, for example, you pay taxes on grocery, on almost everything. And those taxes in return are being used for all the projects that the public need.
Yeah, I mean, so look, again, as I said, there's been a lot of progress, but we need to move our countries from to a higher level of development, to a higher level of quality of institutions, and that inevitably requires strengthening the amount of tax collections that governments have. I mean, right now the median tax rate in the region, the median level of tax, is around 13%, between 13 and 14%, and that's very low for a modern state. A state where we expect to provide security services to countries, health, education, infrastructure, and the like. So we need, if we are to go to the next step, if we are going to be educating all the young people that are being born, that are already here, if we're going to be educating them to be ready for the future workforce, to digitalize our economies, to be catching up on things like artificial intelligence, we need more capable states. Of course, on the government side, governments have to also make sure that the money they're collecting, has to be used as efficiently, as transparently as possible. So there is also what governments have to do. And I think that nexus of issues is really what will determine how well our countries do going forward.
To summarize what you just said, basically we need a change of mindset in how we approach policy, monetary policy, and other policy.
In this case, we're talking about public policy, right? And
yeah.
I think I always have a difficulty about big phrases like change mindset. I think it's a gradual process, but this is the direction of travel.
Okay. Improved tax system will also allow governments to better manage their debt and curb corruption. Okay, thank you. One of the things that you mentioned just now is youth, addressing youth. We have a huge population on the continent, unemployment, and youth, Africa is seen as the next place where innovation, we have a lot of innovation also that are coming out of that continent. Fintech, for example, cryptocurrency, even though many advanced countries, the US is not using it, Nigeria, for example, other countries are using it. So I wanted to talk to you, I'm gonna shift things a little bit. People will look at you as an African. You are at one of the most well-recognized institution in the world. And very, very few people get an opportunity to get to this level. People, given what is going on the continent, I want you to share with us your journey, how you get to this place.
I mean, first, it's a great privilege to of course, be in the position that I'm in, and also tremendous responsibility, which I try and fulfill. How did I get here? I mean, I would say, as always in life, a combination of luck and a bit of hard work. If there's one area where I perhaps did a bit more to improve myself, it's to try and read quite a bit. As a young boy, I used to read quite a lot. I used to have my late mother spend a lot of money buying me books, etc. And I think this love of reading, this love of trying to figure out what it is that makes the economies function, helped me at the margin to get in the door of this institution. And the point I made about luck is that I think I had great bosses that gave me good assignments, and I tried to do well in those assignments, which is what has allowed me to become a director here. It certainly is not because I came with deep connections or deep affiliation with the IMF beforehand, but a mixture of, as I said, luck and some reading.
Okay, and some reading. I mean, you're one of the few black economics, black African economics that are working at this institution. It's a job that a lot of Africans, black people, don't usually have the opportunity to move into. That's why I asked you that question. Like, if someone is looking at you as a role model, like, hey, I would like to do what he's doing, other than reading, what step do they need to take to get their foot into the door?
So, I think over the years, the IMF is also a much changed place, making much more of a deliberate effort to target and bring in qualified Africans to work on the region and beyond, of course. Once you get into the IMF to work as an economist, the great thing about being here is you get to work on around the world, and actually that's what helps make us the institution that we are. The ability that we have to see what countries are doing everywhere else and bring that information, that knowledge to support countries. So in my career, I spent the lion's share of it working on other regions, on other countries, and learned a great deal, which is what puts other economists at the fund in a position to say, look, these countries tried this, didn't quite work. These countries tried this other approach. Maybe try this approach, tailor it to your country's circumstances, and consider doing that. Second, we, in terms of the profile of people that the IMF tries to bring in, it's a mixture of things. Some people come in straight from university, and they come with very limited work experience. Generally, will have had at university training in very macroeconomic, and also macroeconomic issues, but increasingly also people specializing on climate issues, also
poverty, food security.
So that kind of training, and then we have this program called the Economist Program, which is what I came through. But we also have recruitment drives for other economists that are mid-career level. So these people have already done, of course, some macroeconomic training at university, and sometimes are working with government, sometimes with financial institutions, other times with NGOs and the like, working on economic issues, advocacy issues, perhaps. And those kind of people also, we have recruitment drives. In fact, as we speak, we are initiating a recruitment drive. We typically have one at least once, often twice a year.
In Africa?
We go through the region and recruit people sometimes from central banks, ministries of finance, research entities. So we have these recruitment drives to try and bring in people. So these are the two vehicles. Last but not least, we also have quite a lot of specialized people that we bring in. These tend to be experts, for example, on how to do taxes, both on the administration side or the policy side, or working in central banks, how to regulate banks. So for those type of specialists, we have more focused, more targeted entry opportunities. So we advertise, for example, for tax experts, the tax administration experts. People come in as short-term experts, long-term experts. So we have also that other avenue to bring people in.
Okay. In terms of policymaker, what can they do? And you talk about education. What can they do to support youth on the continent, to turn things around, to prepare them for the next decade? Because the world will be relying on Africa for a lot of the labor workforce. So how can policymaker right now, what are you doing to work with them to prepare the youth on the continent for the opportunity ahead?
Okay. So this is exactly what animates us and why we think it's such an urgent issue, helping countries in the region address both the reforms, as I said, that need to be tackled, but also the financing challenge that countries are facing, which are linked. It really is an urgent issue. Why is it urgent? Exactly because the point that you're making, that the kids that are going to be, driving the future global economy, in many cases have been born and are going to be born in the next few years. These children need high quality education. They need high quality healthcare. Okay, so if you ask me, what is by far the most important investment that governments need to make, it is of course to provide them with first-rate education, first-rate healthcare, so that they can be in a position to compete and have a successful careers going forward. And so I think that is by far the most important investment that needs to be made. But of course, education and health and education, so investment in health and education cannot be in isolation, right? I mean, so you also have to think about the digital infrastructure that you have to do, putting in place frameworks that will allow governments to make investment in the right areas, in the right ways. So those are the sets of issues I think that need urgent attention.
Okay. I know you're saying we have to wrap up, so I'm going to ask you as the director, as an African, this is probably a very stressful job, and you have a stressful week ahead of you. My last two questions to you is, what do you do for fun? Two, Washington, D.C. can be considered the diaspora for Ethiopia. You're from Ethiopia. What Ethiopia cuisine or restaurants, I mean, from your memory, when you think of growing up in Ethiopia, share with us some of those memories, and where do you go here to eat some?
I mean, you said about this job being stressful, but I mean, nothing compared to the stress and pressure that the ministers of finance, the central bank governors that I serve face. So, I always remind myself that, this is nothing compared to the people that we are able to serve, the policymakers, people in the region. So, as I said, it's a privilege, and you just get on with the job. In terms of what I do to work-life balance. I tend to be very boring. I still read quite a lot, and not just economics or history books. That was, I think, a bit bad.
What was the last book that you read, or that you're reading?
Well, right now, a bit boring. I'm reading two books: a novel and the life, the biography of Albert Hirschman, social scientist. So those are the two books on my bedside table. The novel is just some thriller, just for distraction. And otherwise, quite a bit of time taken up by family duties. I have kids still in high school, so a lot of running around.
How old are they?
The youngest one is 16. My middle child just went to college, so this last year has been a bit busy making sure she's well positioned. Okay. And Ethiopian food, my favorite cuisine dish is tips. I think we make. I make a mean one myself.
Oh, great! So, he cooks. So, you talk about your mom a little bit. Your mother. Women play a significant role in Africa. And I know the managing director has made that one of the focus of not just Africa, globally, to address gender issue. So rounding this up, what is your view regarding gender inequality in Africa. We also have gender violence. Will you share that with us?
Yes, I lost my mother last year, unfortunately. But she is a model for me, of course. Because I lost my father at a young age. I was only 8, and she brought myself and my 3 younger siblings up all by herself. So both from this personal experience, but more broadly, when you see all the challenges women face, it's really gut-wrenching that we do not do more to elevate the role of women in our countries. One of the most exciting things that has happened in the institution, of course, is the fact that we now pay so much more attention to the gender dimension of inequality, which in our region, of course, is hugely important issue. And also why I'm so animated about making sure countries have resources to spend on education and health, because making sure girls in particular can participate in education in full, making sure that there are enough resources in government budgets to target the expansion of education, really are the kind of things that will make a huge difference going forward. And of course, where there are really egregious laws, egregious regulations that prevent the participation of women in economic activity, we try and call out those also, because again, given just how important the role of women in our countries is, it's just despicable that we don't do enough.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us, and we're looking forward to the reports next week, and hopefully we are looking to hear something good. The investor will be excited to invest more on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you.